Man, can you imagine? Just think back on your life. Are there things in your life that you know about yourself that really nobody else knows, or hardly anybody knows? Are there things that you've thought about, things that you've done that you want them to be buried in the deepest sea, and you would just die if anybody knew about them? Now you're starting to feel what this lady felt, right? I don't know how she got into this position, because it was caught in adultery. So probably she was engaged. She was probably a young lady engaged, not yet, hadn't yet been married, but she could have been a married woman. But she's sleeping with another man, and so you wonder, why would somebody that's just engaged all of a sudden be sleeping with somebody else? And I've done enough counseling over the years to realize that things don't just happen in a vacuum. People have histories. Things happen to people. People get addicted to alcohol, not because they just all of a sudden get addicted, but things have happened to them that they need to get rid of that pain, and they start to self-medicate. People, I've seen kids that have been abused, and as they get older, the way they deal with that is they become very promiscuous. I don't know what happened to this young lady, why she would be engaged and then having relations with another man. She was caught in this act, and she must have been just shamed to death as she stood there. And these Pharisees, these scribes, they didn't care anything about her. If they did, would they have done this public thing? They wanted to trap Jesus, and they had him trapped. They would have had any one of us trapped if we were in that situation, because they said, okay, the law says that you're supposed to stone someone caught in adultery. So Jesus, what do? Now they were putting Jesus in a bind because the law did say that, right? The law, and first of all, just go back for a second. You wonder, why would there be a law that you have to put somebody to death because they were caught in adultery? And obviously, we don't have this law today, and we were coming. An age of grace was coming, but back in the days of Israel, they had some laws that seem severe to us. We have to kind of step back and try and understand what it would be like to be in a culture in that day that was representing God, and what happens to a culture when there is really no sexual mores, when people can do what they want. What happens to families? They needed to have family units so they could grow as God's representative of God's people. If they start saying, okay, well, it's okay to do this, it's okay to do that, all of a sudden, as we've even seen in our culture, even though we're nothing like that, when you start saying, okay, men and women don't have to be responsible for their actions. They don't have to honor wedding vows. That leaves kids, it leaves families in jeopardy. That leaves whole generations that don't know how to act. They don't know what parents are like. And so we might not understand it all, but God had his reasons. Okay, God has his reasons. But now here's Jesus, and Jesus is in this situation. If he says, yeah, okay, go ahead and stone her, whatever happened to this merciful Jesus? He's been teaching for 2 years about grace and about putting yourself in another person's shoes. On the other hand, if he doesn't do that, whatever happened to Moses' law? Because he's not following the law. And not only that, it wasn't legal, right, for Jews to go ahead and decide we're going to have capital punishment on someone, because they were under the Roman government. So he was in a bind, and there really, it seemed like, no way out. And so he did something then. He was sitting there teaching, and then it says he stooped down. He stooped down on the ground and starts writing in the sand. If you can picture that, you've got this lady standing there. She's shamed to death. She's mortified, and then you see this group of Roman of Jewish leaders that are asking Jesus. They're demanding an answer, and then you see the bigger crowd of people that have been taught that are outside. And they're watching, and they're wondering how this is going to turn out. And they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded that such be stoned, but what do you say?" This they said, testing him, that they might have something to which they could accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So they were they were accusing him, and they were continuing to ask him, trying to get his attention. Well, what are you going to say? And he was writing in the sand. What do you think he was writing? That's been a topic of discussion for centuries now. What was Jesus writing? And some people refer to verses like Jeremiah. What was that verse that you said, Fred? There was a verse that talks about Jesus, God writing in the sand. There was also in Deuteronomy, it tells us that God with his finger wrote the Ten Commandments, right? And so some people might have pictured when they saw Jesus kneeling down there and realizing he was claiming to be the Messiah, that he was making him as equal with God, was kind of a picture of that. But it doesn't really say. So this is kind of what I think. I think, for one thing, he was stalling a little bit. He was building the momentum, the building up the tension a little bit. I think also when Jesus saw this lady, when he saw this young lady standing there, these guys just using her as a pawn, I think he was touched. He was thinking, this isn't right. And he may have been down there just gathering himself together. What am I going to do in this situation to not totally humiliate this girl? What am I going to do? And so it says, he finally raised himself up. So he was on the ground, right, writing. He raised himself up and he said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first."